Elena DeLuca's hand cracked across the face of Naples' most feared crime lord in front of 500 wedding guests, and the ballroom fell silent. Everyone waited for blood. Everyone expected violence. But Damian Moretti, 65 years old and untouchable, just smiled like the devil and told the priest to keep reading. That slap should have been her death sentence. Instead, it became the beginning of something no one could have predicted. A love story born from rage, built on broken promises, and sealed in the dangerous silence between two people who never wanted each other until they did. Like this video, comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels and follow along to the end. The chandeliers in the Moretti Estate ballroom were older than most of the men in attendance, and they hung like crystal guillotines over 500 heads. Elena DeLuca stood at the back entrance in a dress that cost more than her college tuition, and she felt like merchandise. White silk, hand-beaded bodice, a veil her mother had cried over for an hour that morning. Elena hadn't cried. She'd gone numb somewhere around 3 in the morning and hadn't thawed since. "You look beautiful, sweetheart." Her father's voice came from beside her, low and careful, like he was trying to gentle a horse that might bolt. Elena didn't look at him. "Don't!" "Elena," I said, "don't." She stared straight ahead at the double doors, at the slice of light coming through where they hadn't quite closed. Beyond them, an orchestra played something that probably cost a fortune and sounded like a funeral march. "You don't get to call me sweetheart today. You don't get to pretend this is normal." Sal DeLuca's jaw worked. He was a small man with soft hands who'd spent his whole life making just enough poor decisions to stay in debt to dangerous people. This was simply the largest poor decision, and Elena was paying for it. "It's not what I wanted," he said finally, "but it's what you agreed to." "I didn't have a choice." Elena turned to him then, and her eyes were dry and cold. "Neither do I. That's the problem." The doors opened. The music swelled. A coordinator in a headset gestured frantically, and Elena's father offered his arm like this was any other wedding, like she was any other bride. Like the man waiting at the altar wasn't a 65-year-old crime boss who'd buried 3 wives and more enemies than anyone could count. She didn't take his arm. She walked. The ballroom was a cathedral of wealth and violence. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine. Walls lined with oil paintings of dead Morettis. Men in suits that cost more than cars, sitting beside women dripping in diamonds that had probably been pried off the fingers of someone who'd said no to the wrong person. Everyone turned to watch her, and Elena felt their eyes like cuts. At the altar, Damian Moretti waited. He was tall. That was the first thing anyone noticed. Tall and broad-shouldered in a way that made expensive tailoring look almost modest. His hair was silver, combed back from a face that had been handsome once and was now just imposing. Deep lines around the mouth, a nose that had been broken and set badly, eyes so dark they looked black from a distance. He watched her approach with no expression at all. Elena climbed the 3 steps to the altar, and her father faded back into the crowd like smoke. The priest, some ancient Moretti family retainer who looked like he'd overseen the Inquisition, opened a leather-bound book and began to read in Italian. Elena didn't hear the words. She was counting her heartbeats, trying to breathe through the corset some sadist had laced too tight, trying not to scream. Damian stood 18 inches away. Up close, she could see the details. The scar through his left eyebrow, the slight gray tint to his skin that spoke of too many years, too many late nights, too much blood. The perfect knot in his black tie, the way his hands rested at his sides, utterly still, like a predator conserving energy. The priest said something, and Damian responded in that voice she'd only heard once before, at the contract signing 2 weeks ago. Deep. Quiet. The kind of voice that didn't need to rise because everyone was already listening. Then the priest turned to her. "Elena Maria DeLuca, do you take this man?" She didn't let him finish. "No." The ballroom held its breath. The priest blinked. "I'm sorry?" "I said no." Elena's voice came out stronger than she'd expected, louder. She turned to Damian, and for the first time in 2 weeks, she let herself be angry instead of numb. "I don't take you. I didn't choose you. I don't want you. And every person in this room knows this is a transaction, not a marriage. So let's stop pretending." Someone in the 3rd row gasped. The priest looked like he might faint, and Damian Moretti, the most feared man in Naples, just studied her with those black eyes and said nothing. Elena's hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. 2 weeks of swallowing rage. 2 weeks of watching her father negotiate her life away like she was property. 2 weeks of everyone telling her this was just how things were done. It all came pouring out. "You want to own me?" Her voice cracked. "You want to put a ring on my finger and pretend that makes this anything other than slavery? Fine. But don't ask me to smile about it." The silence was so complete she could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Then Damien moved. Not fast, not threateningly. He just took one step closer, and Elena's breath caught because she'd finally done it. She'd finally pushed hard enough, and now everyone would see what happened when you embarrassed a man like him in front of his entire world. He raised one hand. Elena didn't think. Her palm cracked across his face so hard the sound echoed off the marble walls. The gasp that went through the crowd was like a wave. Someone dropped a glass. The priest made a strangled noise, and Elena stood there with her hand stinging and her heart trying to beat out of her chest, waiting for retaliation. Damien's head had turned slightly from the impact. A red mark was already forming on his cheek. Slowly, he turned back to face her. His expression hadn't changed. He wasn't angry. He wasn't anything. He just looked at her for a long moment, and then he did something that was somehow worse than violence. He smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who just confirmed something he'd suspected and wasn't displeased by the answer. "Continue," he said to the priest. The old man gaped. "Signor Moretti, perhaps we should Continue." The priest looked at Elena, then at the crowd, then at Damien. Whatever he saw in Damien's face made the decision for him. He cleared his throat, found his place in the book, and kept reading as if nothing had happened. Elena stood frozen. Her hand was still raised slightly, still tingling. This was wrong. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to explode. He was supposed to hit her back, to call off the wedding, to do something that made sense. But he just stood there, calm as a church statue, and listened to the priest recite vows that meant nothing. When it came time for the rings, Damien produced a band of platinum and diamonds that probably cost more than her childhood home. He took her hand. His grip was warm, dry, and utterly impersonal, and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Of course it did. Men like him didn't make mistakes about details. The priest looked at Elena. "And do you have a ring for—" "She doesn't need to," Damien said. "I'm already wearing mine." He held up his left hand, and Elena saw the simple gold band on his fourth finger. Worn. Scratched. At least 30 years old if she had to guess. The wedding ring from a previous wife, probably. The thought made her stomach turn. The priest swallowed. "Then, by the power vested in me by the Church and the Republic of Italy, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may—" "No," Damien said. The priest stopped. "Signore? No kiss?" Damien's eyes never left Elena's face. "My wife has made her feelings clear. I won't add insult to injury." And somehow, that was the moment Elena realized she might have miscalculated. Because a man who responded to humiliation with patience was infinitely more dangerous than one who responded with rage. The priest closed his book. The orchestra started playing something bright and celebratory that clashed with the tension in the room. Damien offered Elena his arm. She ignored it and walked down the steps alone. The reception was a blur of faces and noise. People congratulated her with careful smiles. They told her how beautiful she looked. They called her Signora Moretti, like the name wasn't a brand on her skin. Elena accepted it all with a numbness that felt like armor. Damien stayed close, but not touching. He spoke to guests, accepted congratulations, played the role of pleased groom with the kind of ease that came from decades of wearing masks. And every so often, Elena would catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Dinner was served at long tables decorated with flowers that must have cost a fortune. Elena sat beside her new husband and didn't touch her food. Around them, the Moretti family and their associates ate and drank and laughed like this was a celebration instead of a hostage situation. "You should eat," Damien said quietly. It was the first time he'd spoken directly to her since the altar. "I'm not hungry." "You haven't eaten all day." Elena turned to look at him. "How would you know?" "Your father mentioned you didn't touch breakfast, and you were too pale during the ceremony. Low blood sugar." He gestured to her plate. "The salmon is very good, or if you don't like fish, I can have them bring you something else." "I don't want anything from you." You're going to pass out if you don't eat. Maybe that would be better. Something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, something quieter and more complicated. Elena, don't! She said it too loud. Several nearby guests looked over. Elena lowered her voice. Don't use my name like we're familiar. Don't pretend to care if I eat or sleep or breathe. You bought me. You don't get to act concerned now. Damien was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up his wine glass, took a slow sip, and set it down with careful precision. When he spoke again, his voice was even softer than before. I didn't buy you. Your father sold you. There's a difference. Not to me. No, he agreed. I don't suppose there is. He didn't try to make her eat again. But 10 minutes later, a server appeared with a bowl of soup and fresh bread, and when Elena looked up, Damien was in conversation with someone 3 seats down, apparently not paying attention. The soup smelled good. After a moment, Elena picked up the spoon. She told herself it was just practicality, just survival. It had nothing to do with the fact that he'd remembered she got lightheaded when she didn't eat, or that he'd arranged for something simple instead of the rich salmon she genuinely didn't think she could stomach. The dinner dragged on for hours. Speeches were made. Toasts were raised. At one point, Damien's younger brother Carlo, a man in his 50s with mean eyes and a cruel mouth, stood up and made a joke about May-December romances that had the whole table laughing. Elena kept her face blank and imagined throwing her wine in his face. Finally, mercifully, it was over. Guests began to filter out. Men shook Damien's hand and clapped him on the shoulder. Women kissed Elena's cheeks and told her how lucky she was in voices that suggested they knew exactly how unlucky she was. By midnight, the ballroom was empty except for staff clearing tables and Elena sitting in a chair with her shoes off because her feet were screaming. Damien approached from across the room. He'd removed his jacket at some point and his sleeves were rolled to his elbows. It made him look slightly more human, only slightly. It's time, he said. Elena's throat went dry. Time for what? To go upstairs. Of course. The wedding night. The final indignity in a day full of them. Elena stood on aching feet and followed her husband out of the ballroom, through hallways lined with expensive art, up a curved staircase that belonged in a palace. He stopped in front of a door on the 3rd floor. This is your room. Elena blinked. My room? Yes, mine is down the hall. He opened the door, revealing a bedroom that was larger than her old apartment. Cream-colored walls, antique furniture, a bed that could sleep 4 people. Your things have been moved in already. If you need anything, there's a phone on the nightstand. Dial 3 for the kitchen, 5 for housekeeping, 9 for my office. Elena stared at him. I don't understand. Which part? Any of it. We're married. You're supposed to... She couldn't finish the sentence. Damien's expression was unreadable. I'm supposed to do many things. Most of them I have no interest in doing. Get some rest, Elena. We'll talk in the morning. He turned to leave. Wait. The word came out before she could stop it. Damien paused. Elena struggled to find the right question among the hundreds crowding her head. Why did you let me hit you? He looked back at her, and for just a second she saw something in his face that might have been sadness, or regret, or just exhaustion. Because you needed to, he said simply, and because I've been hit by people who actually wanted to hurt me. You're not one of them. Then he walked away, leaving Elena standing in the doorway of her gilded cage, more confused than she'd been all day. She went inside and closed the door, locked it, then stood there for a full minute, waiting for him to come back, to test the handle, to demand entry. He didn't. Elena moved to the window. 3 stories up, overlooking gardens lit by tasteful landscaping lights, beautiful and unreachable. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and finally, let herself cry. The dress came off in pieces. She tore at the buttons she could reach and gave up on the ones she couldn't. It puddled on the floor in an expensive heap, and she left it there. The corset was harder, but anger made her strong, and eventually it joined the dress. She found a nightgown laid out on the bed, white silk, of course, because someone had a sense of humor, and pulled it on. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the ring on her finger. Her phone buzzed. She'd forgotten about it, tucked in a drawer by whoever had moved her things. Elena pulled it out and found 17 messages, most from friends she'd been avoiding for 2 weeks. A few from cousins who'd heard about the wedding and wanted details. One from her mother, just 3 words. Call me tomorrow. Elena deleted them all. Then she turned off the phone and threw it in the drawer. She should sleep. It was after 1 in the morning, and she was exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Damien's face after she'd slapped him. That terrible, knowing smile. Because you needed to. What kind of man said something like that? Elena got up and paced. The room was too big, too quiet. Every surface was expensive and tasteful and completely impersonal. There was a bookshelf, but all the books were in Italian and looked like the kind of thing you bought to fill space, not to read. There was a closet the size of her old bedroom, already filled with clothes she'd never chosen. There was a bathroom with marble counters and a tub that could fit 3 people. It was a prison that looked like a palace. She was examining the bathroom, looking for a window maybe, or a weapon, or just something to do with her hands, when she heard the knock. Elena froze. Soft. 3 taps. Then silence. Her heart kicked into overdrive. She thought about not answering, about pretending to be asleep, but the knock came again, patient and persistent, and she realized that locked doors probably didn't mean much in this house. She opened it. Damien stood in the hallway, still in his shirt and slacks. He'd loosened his tie. In his hands was a small tray with a teapot and 2 cups. I saw your light was still on, he said. I thought you might want something to help you sleep. Elena stared at the tea. Is it drugged? No. How do I know that? You don't. He didn't sound offended, just matter of fact. But if I wanted you unconscious, there were easier ways to accomplish that during dinner. The logic was sound and also deeply unsettling. Elena didn't move from the doorway. What do you want? To talk. We have nothing to talk about. We have a marriage to talk about, a life, expectations, and boundaries. Damien shifted the tray slightly. This is still hot. Are you going to invite me in, or should I stand in the hallway until it gets cold? Elena wanted to say no, wanted to slam the door in his face, but curiosity was a sharp hook, and she'd spent all day surrounded by hundreds of people without getting a single honest answer to anything. She stepped back. Damien entered and set the tray on a small table by the window. He poured tea into both cups, some herbal blend that smelled like chamomile and something else Elena didn't recognize, and sat down in one of the chairs. After a moment, Elena took the other. They sat in silence for a while, drinking tea, not looking at each other. Finally, Damien spoke. I owe you an explanation. You owe me a lot more than that. Yes, he agreed. But an explanation is what I can give you right now, so that's where we'll start. Elena set down her cup. Fine. Explain why a man your age needs to marry someone young enough to be his granddaughter. I'm 65, not 90. You could be my daughter, perhaps. Granddaughter is excessive. He said it without humor. But your point stands. The age difference is grotesque. I'm aware. Then why do it? Damien was quiet for a long time. He stared into his tea like it might have answers. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, more tired. Because I'm lonely, he said, and because I'm not going to live forever. And because every morning I wake up in a house full of people who fear me and work for me and need things from me, and there is no one, not one single person, who simply sits beside me. Elena blinked. Whatever she'd expected, it wasn't that. I have had 3 wives, Damien continued. The first I married because my father arranged it. She died in childbirth. The second I married because I thought I loved her. She died of cancer. The third I married because I was drowning, and she was kind. She died in a car accident. He looked up at Elena. I am very good at being a husband to corpses. The living ones are more difficult. That's not funny. It wasn't meant to be. Elena's hands were shaking again. She clasped them in her lap. So what am I? Number 4 in your collection of tragic wives? Am I supposed to die conveniently so you can give this same speech to number 5? No. Damien's voice was firm. You're supposed to live. That's the entire point. What point? You're not making any sense. He set down his cup and leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands folded. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked something other than composed. He looked old. I have spent 40 years building power, he said. I have wealth, respect, fear. I own politicians and police. I could have you killed with a phone call or start a war with a nod, and none of it matters. Because at the end of every day, I go to bed alone in a house that feels like a mausoleum, and I wonder what the point was. That's not my problem. No, it's mine. But your father made it your problem when he borrowed money he couldn't repay and offered you as collateral. Elena's stomach dropped. He what? You didn't know. It wasn't a question. Damien sat back, something like regret crossing his face. Of course you didn't know. He told you I demanded a wife, that I gave him no choice. He said you'd kill him if he refused. I would have, but not over a marriage contract. Over the 3 million euros he borrowed last year to cover his gambling debts, which he promised to repay in 6 months, and has so far repaid exactly none of. The room tilted. Elena gripped the arms of her chair. 3 million? Plus interest. He came to me 2 months ago and said he couldn't pay. He begged for more time. I told him I don't give extensions. I take collateral. Damien's voice was flat, reciting facts. He offered his house, his business, his car. None of it was worth enough. So he offered you. Elena couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her father he'd actually... I could have said no, Damien continued. I should have said no. But I looked at your photo and I read the file my people put together. Economics degree, top of your class, fluent in 3 languages, no criminal record, no connections to other families, and I thought perhaps this could be a different kind of arrangement. What kind of arrangement? An honest one. He met her eyes. I told you I'm lonely. I didn't tell you that I'm also dying. The world stopped. Elena stared at him. What? Not immediately, not tomorrow, but I have maybe 5 years left if I'm lucky. My heart is failing, has been for the past 3 years. My doctors tell me to reduce stress, change my diet, retire. He laughed, dry and humorless. As if any of those things are possible in my line of work. I don't understand. Why would you? Because I want those 5 years to mean something. I want to wake up and have breakfast with someone who has thoughts about things other than territory disputes and profit margins. I want to talk to someone who doesn't agree with everything I say out of fear. He stopped, shook his head. It doesn't matter what I want. What matters is what I'm offering you. You're not offering me anything. You bought me. I paid your father's debt. That's different. Damien stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens. Here's what I'm actually offering, Elena. A marriage in name, separate rooms. No expectations of affection or intimacy unless you decide otherwise. Full access to my resources. You want to finish your degree, start a business, travel, whatever. I'll support it. And when I die, which will probably be sooner than either of us would like, everything I own becomes yours. Elena's head was spinning. Why would you do that? Because I have no children, no heirs I trust. My brother Carlo is a vicious idiot who would burn through my fortune in 5 years and start 3 wars doing it. The rest of my family is no better. He turned to face her. But you're smart, educated. You slapped me in front of 500 people because you were angry about injustice. That takes either courage or stupidity, and I don't think you're stupid. I'm supposed to be grateful? Elena's voice rose. You paid my father 3 million euros to own me, and I'm supposed to say thank you because you promised not to rape me? No, you're supposed to be angry. You should be furious. I would be. Damien came back to his chair but didn't sit. He just stood there, looking down at her with those black eyes. I'm not asking for gratitude, Elena. I'm asking for time. Give me 1 year. Live in this house. Get to know me. Let me show you that I mean what I say. If after 1 year you still hate me, I'll divorce you and give you 10 million euros to start over wherever you want. And if I refuse, if I say I want out now, then I'll divorce you now and give you nothing, and your father's debt comes due. He'll be dead within the week. There it was, the trap, the cold reality underneath all the pretty words. Elena stood up, knocking her chair back. So it's not really a choice at all? No, Damien said quietly. It's not, but it's the best choice I can give you. Elena wanted to scream, wanted to hit him again, wanted to run out of this house and never look back. But she'd already learned the lesson every powerless person learns eventually. Sometimes you don't get to choose between good options and bad options. Sometimes you only get to choose between bad and worse. 1 year, she said finally. 1 year. And you don't touch me. You don't come into this room unless I invite you. You don't. I don't, Damien agreed. I promise. Elena laughed, and it came out brittle and jagged. The promises of a crime boss, that's supposed to make me feel better? No, but it's all I have. He moved toward the door, and Elena felt a strange, unwelcome flicker of something that might have been disappointment, which was insane. She should be relieved he was leaving, should be glad this terrible conversation was over. But he paused with his hand on the doorknob and reached into his pocket. When he turned back, he was holding a photograph. One more thing, he said, and offered it to her. Elena took it. The photograph was old, faded at the edges. It showed a woman, maybe 30 years old, with dark hair and a bright smile. She was sitting on a wall somewhere with the ocean behind her, and she looked happy. Really, genuinely happy in a way Elena wasn't sure she'd ever seen in a photograph before. That's Maria, Damien said softly. My third wife. We had 11 years together. She laughed at my jokes even when they weren't funny. She stole the blankets. She burned everything she tried to cook. And every single day I was married to her was better than any day before I met her. Elena looked at the photo, then at Damien. His face had changed. The hardness was gone, replaced by something raw and undefended. I'm not asking you to be her, he said. I'm not even asking you to love me. I'm just asking you to understand that I know what I'm asking of you is unfair, that I know this is a prison, and that if I could think of any other way to not spend the last years of my life alone, I would take it. He turned and left, closing the door softly behind him. Elena stood holding the photograph of a dead woman and wondered how her life had become so strange. She looked at Maria's smile, unforced, unafraid, and tried to imagine what it must be like to look at Damien Moretti and see not a monster, but a man. She couldn't. But as she got into bed and turned off the light, Elena realized something that scared her more than anything else that had happened today. She was starting to wonder if she wanted to. Elena woke to sunlight streaming through windows she hadn't remembered to close, and the immediate, crushing awareness that yesterday had actually happened. The ring on her finger caught the light and threw tiny rainbows across the ceiling. She stared at them until they made her nauseous. Someone had picked up the wedding dress. It was gone from where she'd left it in a heap on the floor, along with the corset and veil. In their place was a tray on the nightstand, coffee, fresh fruit, toast, that hadn't been there when she'd finally fallen asleep around 4 a.m. Elena sat up too fast and regretted it. Her head pounded, her eyes felt like sandpaper. She ignored the tray and went to the bathroom, where she stood under scalding water for 20 minutes trying to wash off the feeling of being owned. It didn't work. When she emerged, wrapped in a towel, she found clothes laid out on the bed. Not the expensive designer things from the closet, but her own clothes. Jeans, a simple black t-shirt, her favorite cardigan with the frayed cuffs. Someone had gone through her belongings and known exactly which pieces would make her feel most like herself. It was thoughtful. It was invasive. It was both things at once, and Elena hated that she was grateful. She dressed and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to decide what came next. She could stay in this room, hide, pretend the rest of the house didn't exist, but the walls were already starting to feel too close, and she'd never been good at hiding. The coffee had gone lukewarm. Elena drank it anyway, bitter and unsweetened, and then she opened the door. The hallway was empty, quiet. Thick carpet absorbed the sound of her footsteps as she walked, trailing one hand along the wall. She passed closed doors, 6 of them on this floor alone, and wondered what was behind each one. Guest rooms? Offices? Other wives' rooms? Preserved like shrines? The thought made her shiver. She found the stairs and descended to the 2nd floor, then the 1st. The house was enormous, all marble and dark wood and oil paintings of stern-faced men who'd probably killed people. Somewhere in the distance she could hear voices. Staff, maybe. The people who kept this museum running. Elena followed the sound and found herself in a kitchen that belonged in a restaurant, gleaming appliances. 2 ovens. A prep island the size of her old apartment's living room. A woman in her 50s wearing an apron and comfortable shoes looked up from where she was chopping vegetables. Buongiorno, signora Moretti, the woman said, and her smile was warm but her eyes were assessing. I'm Rosa. I manage the household. Did you sleep well? No. Elena saw no point in lying. Where's Damien? In his office, third door on the right, past the library. Rosa gestured with her knife. But he asked not to be disturbed before 10. Would you like breakfast? Something more substantial than what was sent up? I'm not hungry. You didn't touch dinner last night either. Rosa's tone was gentle but firm, the voice of someone used to managing difficult people. Signor Moretti was very clear that you're to eat properly. Signor Moretti doesn't get to decide what I do. No, signora. But I do get to worry when a young woman doesn't eat for 24 hours. Sit. I'll make you something light. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to assert some kind of control over her own life, even if it was just control over whether she ate scrambled eggs. But Rosa had already turned back to her cutting board, and there was something about her manner, brisk, no nonsense, completely unimpressed by drama, that made Elena feel like a child being managed by a particularly competent grandmother. She sat. 10 minutes later, Rosa set a plate in front of her. Scrambled eggs, toast, sliced tomatoes. Simple. Exactly what Elena would have made for herself if she'd had a kitchen and any energy whatsoever. Thank you, Elena said quietly. Prego? Rosa poured her fresh coffee. You have questions. Everyone does on the first day. Do I get answers? Depends on the questions. Elena ate a bite of eggs. They were perfect, which was annoying. How long have you worked here? 23 years. I came when Signora Maria was still alive. The third wife. Yes. Rosa's expression softened. She was a good woman, kind. She used to sit in this kitchen and talk to me for hours, drove the other staff crazy because she'd never let anyone serve her, always wanted to help. Elena wrapped her hands around the coffee mug. What happened to her? Car accident. She was driving home from the market. A truck ran a red light. Rosa's voice was matter-of-fact, but her eyes were sad. Signor Moretti was not the same after. He's never been the same. Is that supposed to make me feel sorry for him? No, Signora, it's supposed to help you understand him. There's a difference. Elena took another bite, chewed, swallowed. Did he love her? Very much. Then why am I here? Rosa looked at her for a long moment. Because loving someone who died doesn't mean you want to die alone. Eat your toast. It's getting cold. Elena finished breakfast in silence. Rosa worked around her, chopping vegetables, preparing what looked like ingredients for dinner, humming something under her breath. It should have been awkward, but somehow it wasn't. Rosa had the gift of making her presence feel unobtrusive, like furniture that happened to be alive. When Elena pushed away her empty plate, Rosa nodded approval. Better. Now, would you like a tour of the house, or would you prefer to explore on your own? Alone, Elena said immediately. Then a piece of advice. The east wing is Signor Moretti's domain, office, study, private rooms. He won't mind if you go there, but his men will watch you. The west wing is yours. Do whatever you like. The gardens are open. The library is extraordinary if you read Italian. And if you need anything at all, pick up any phone and dial 2. That reaches me. Why are you being kind to me? Rosa smiled. Because you're 23 years old and you look terrified, and I have a daughter your age. Also because Signor Moretti asked me to look after you, and I've never seen him ask for anything with quite that much hope in his voice. She left before Elena could respond to that. Elena spent the rest of the morning wandering. The house was a maze of rooms that bled into each other without clear purpose. A sitting room no one sat in, a dining room large enough for 30 people. A music room with a grand piano that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Everything was expensive and tasteful and deeply, profoundly empty. The library was the first room that felt alive. Floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with books in Italian, English, French, German, leather chairs worn soft from use, a desk covered in papers and pens, windows overlooking gardens that were green even in late September. Elena pulled a book at random, Machiavelli, because of course, and sat in one of the chairs. She tried to read. The Italian was dense and archaic, and after 10 minutes she gave up and just sat there, staring at nothing. You could try the English translations, a voice said from the doorway. They're on the third shelf, left side. Elena looked up. Damien stood leaning against the doorframe, wearing dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked tired, older than he had last night, if that was possible. I thought you didn't want to be disturbed before 10, Elena said. It's 10:30. Is it? She'd lost track of time entirely. I didn't mean to intrude on your library. It's your library too. Damien came into the room but kept his distance, settling into a chair near the window. Everything in this house is yours as much as mine. I meant what I said last night. Elena set down the book. Did you mean the part about dying? Yes. How bad is it? Bad enough that my doctors have strong opinions about my lifestyle choices. Not bad enough that I'm bedridden. He said it like he was discussing the weather. I have medication, a pacemaker, regular monitoring. It buys me time. How much time? 5 years, maybe more if I'm lucky, less if I'm not. Elena studied him. In daylight, the signs were more obvious, the slight gray tint to his skin, the way he moved carefully, like someone in chronic pain who'd learned to hide it, the faint scar on his chest that disappeared beneath his collar and was probably from the pacemaker surgery. You don't look sick, she said. I'm very good at not looking sick. It's bad for business if your enemies think you're weak. Is that what I am? Your enemy? Damien met her eyes. I hope not. They sat in silence for a while. Outside, gardeners were trimming hedges. The sound of shears snipping was rhythmic and oddly soothing. Finally, Elena spoke. I talked to my father this morning. Damien's expression didn't change. How did that go? I called him a coward and told him I never want to see him again. Her voice was flat. He cried, said he had no choice, that you would have killed him. I would have. I know, he's still a coward. Yes, Damien agreed. He is. Elena picked at a loose thread on the chair's armrest. He asked if you'd hurt me, if you'd... She couldn't finish the sentence. And what did you tell him? That it was none of his business, that he gave up the right to ask questions about my life when he sold me. She looked up at Damien. But I want to know too. Last night you said separate rooms, no expectations, but you're still a man, and I'm still... Elena. Damien's voice was firm, but not unkind. I have not touched a woman in that way since Maria died 4 years ago. I'm not going to start now with someone who doesn't want me. What if I never want you? Then I'll die a celibate old man, and the universe will have a good laugh at my expense. He said it without self-pity. Just fact. I didn't marry you for sex. I married you because the silence in this house was killing me faster than my heart ever could. Elena didn't know what to say to that. It was too honest, too raw. She'd expected cruelty or manipulation or cold pragmatism, not this exhausted vulnerability from a man who was supposed to be made of stone. I don't know how to do this, she said finally. I don't know how to live with you. Neither do I. We'll figure it out. And if we can't, then we'll fail together, and at least I won't die wondering what might have happened if I'd tried. He stood then, moving with that same careful control. I have meetings this afternoon, business. But tonight, if you'd like, we could have dinner together, just the two of us. You can ask me anything you want, about the family, the business, why I'm such a sentimental fool, or we can eat in silence if you prefer. What if I want to eat in my room? Then Rosa will bring you a tray, and I'll eat alone like I have for the past 4 years, and nothing will change. He paused at the door. But I'm hoping you'll say yes, not because you have to, because you're curious. He left. Elena sat in the library for another hour, not reading, just thinking. She hated that he was right. She was curious. Curious about the man who'd let her slap him in front of hundreds of people. Curious about the man who'd shown her a photograph of his dead wife and looked at it like his heart was breaking. Curious about what kind of monster asked for companionship instead of obedience. At 2 in the afternoon, she picked up the phone on the desk and dialed 2. Rosa answered on the first ring. Yes, Senora? The dinner tonight, what time? 7 o'clock. In the small dining room, the one off the kitchen. Tell him I'll be there. Elena hung up before she could change her mind. She spent the rest of the afternoon in the gardens. They were extensive, maze-like, full of roses that were past their prime, but still beautiful. She found a bench hidden behind a hedge and sat there watching clouds move across the sky. At 6:30, she went back to her room and stared at the closet full of clothes she'd never chosen. Everything was expensive. Designer labels. The kind of things that came with tissue paper and personal shoppers. Elena hated all of it. She ended up wearing her jeans and a clean shirt. If Damien wanted a wife who dressed like she belonged in fashion magazines, he'd married the wrong woman. The small dining room was nothing like the ballroom from yesterday. It was actually small, a table for 6, simple wooden chairs, walls painted a warm yellow that caught the evening light. Damien was already there, also in jeans and a casual shirt, and Elena felt something loosen in her chest. "You changed," she said. "So did you, or rather, you decided not to." He pulled out a chair for her. "I appreciate the statement." "It's not a statement, it's just clothes. Everything is a statement when you're married to me. You'll learn that quickly." Rosa appeared with wine and water, set them down, and disappeared again. The table was already set with simple dishes, pasta, salad, bread. Family style like someone's grandmother would serve. They ate in silence for a few minutes. The pasta was good. Elena was hungrier than she'd realized. Finally, Damien set down his fork. "You said I could answer questions. I don't know what to ask." "Then I'll start. Tell me about your degree." "Economics," Rosa said. "International economics and finance. I graduated in June. Top of your class." "Second." Elena took a sip of water. "There was a guy named Marco who was insufferable and brilliant. He beat me by half a percentage point." "Do you hate him?" "Yes. Also, I respect him enormously, which makes the hate worse." Damien smiled. It was small and brief, but genuine. "What were you planning to do before your father's debt came due?" Elena's throat tightened. "I had a job offer. Financial analyst at a consulting firm in Milan. Good salary, benefits, room for advancement. I was supposed to start in October." "I'm sorry." "No, you're not. If you were sorry, you'd let me go." "I'm sorry you lost the opportunity. I'm not sorry you're here. Both things can be true." Elena stabbed a piece of pasta harder than necessary. "You're infuriating." "Yes. Maria used to say the same thing." They ate some more. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that were too beautiful for how Elena felt. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said. "That's why we're here. Why did you really marry me? And don't give me the loneliness speech again. I believe you're lonely. I don't believe that's the whole story." Damien was quiet for a long time. He pushed food around his plate, not eating. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, lower, more careful. "Do you know what happens to men like me when we get old? When we lose our strength, our edge, our fear factor?" He looked up at her. "We get replaced by younger men, hungrier men. Men who see weakness and pounce. I have maybe 5 years before my heart gives out, or someone puts a bullet in me, whichever comes first. And I realized I could spend those 5 years fighting to hold on to power that doesn't matter, or I could spend them trying to build something that does. And I'm the something? You're the person I'm hoping can help me build it. A foundation, maybe. Something legitimate. A way to move family money into businesses that don't involve guns and extortion and blood." He set down his fork. "I told you I have no children, no heirs I trust. But if I had someone smart, educated, untainted by the family business, someone who could take the resources I've accumulated and turn them into something good, that would be a legacy worth dying for." Elena stared at him. "You want me to launder your reputation. I want you to use my money to do something I never could. Build hospitals, fund scholarships, create jobs. Whatever you think would make the world less terrible than I've made it." He met her eyes. "I'm not a good man, Elena. I've killed people. I've destroyed lives. I've built an empire on suffering. I can't undo any of that. But maybe, if I give you the resources and get out of your way, you can balance the scales a little." "That's insane." "Probably. You're basically asking me to be your redemption project. I'm asking you to be yourself and letting that be enough." Elena pushed back from the table. She needed to move, to pace, to put distance between herself and this conversation that was turning everything she thought she understood upside down. "I don't want to forgive you," she said to the window, to the darkening sky, to no one. "I don't want to like you, or understand you, or see you as anything other than the man who bought me." "I know. But you keep saying things that make me—" She stopped, shook her head. "I hate this. What specifically? That you're honest. That you show me photographs of your dead wife. That you give me my own room and offer me freedom and act like I'm a person instead of property. It would be easier if you were just a monster. I'm sorry to disappoint. Elena turned. Damien was still at the table, watching her with those dark eyes that missed nothing. He looked tired, sad, human in a way that made her angry because it was so much harder to hate someone who was human. I need air, she said abruptly. The gardens are open all night. There's lighting on the paths. Elena left without another word. She walked until she found the bench from earlier, hidden behind hedges where no one could see her, and she sat there in the dark trying to sort through the impossible tangle in her head. She'd expected a monster. She'd gotten a dying man who wanted companionship. She'd expected cruelty. She'd gotten honesty that was almost worse because it required something from her other than fear. It required thought, choice, the possibility of forgiveness. And she wasn't ready for any of that. She wasn't ready for any of this. Time passed. The air grew cold. Elena wrapped her arms around herself and stayed where she was, stubborn and miserable. Signora? A voice called from somewhere in the gardens. One of the staff, probably, sent to check on her. Elena didn't answer. Footsteps on gravel, then silence. Then Damien's voice, closer than she'd expected. Rosa is worried you'll catch cold. Elena didn't look at him. Tell Rosa I'm fine. I did. She didn't believe me. A pause. May I sit? It's your garden. It's our garden. He sat anyway, keeping a careful foot of distance between them. They sat in silence for a while, listening to night sounds, crickets, distant traffic, the wind in the trees. Maria used to come out here when she was upset with me, Damien said quietly. Which was often, because I'm not an easy man to live with. She'd sit on this exact bench and I'd find her an hour later, still angry, still beautiful. I'm not her. No, but you're sitting on her bench, in her garden, married to her husband. The echo is strong enough to make me foolish. Elena finally looked at him. In the dark, he was just a silhouette. Broad shoulders, silver hair catching moonlight. He could have been anyone, could have been no one. What did you do? She asked. When you found her here? I apologized. Usually for being controlling or overprotective or forgetting that she had thoughts and feelings that didn't revolve around my world. He smiled, but it was sad. She'd tell me I was an idiot. I'd agree. We'd go inside and I'd try to do better. And then a week later we'd have the same fight because I'm slow to learn. Did you? Do better? Sometimes, not always. He was quiet for a moment. The last fight we had was about the car. She wanted to drive herself to the market. I wanted to send a driver. She said I was being paranoid. I said I was being careful. She drove herself anyway because Maria did what she wanted. And 3 hours later the hospital called. Elena heard the pain in his voice, and it did something to her, cracked something she'd been trying to keep frozen. It wasn't your fault, she said. I know, but knowing and feeling are different things. They sat there together, two people who didn't want to be there, didn't want to be married, didn't want any of this. But the night was cold, and the bench was hard, and somehow the silence between them felt less hostile than it had at dinner. Finally, Elena stood. I'm going inside. Elena. Damien stood too. Thank you. For what? For having dinner with me? For not running away? For sitting on this bench and letting me be sad for a minute? He looked at her and his expression was open in a way she'd never seen from him. I know this is hard. I know you hate me. But thank you for trying. Elena didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and walked back toward the house, leaving Damien alone in the garden with his ghosts. She went to her room, locked the door, and stood in the middle of the floor feeling exhausted and confused and angry at herself for feeling confused. This should be simple. He was the enemy. He'd taken her freedom. The fact that he'd asked nicely and had good reasons didn't change the fundamental truth that she was trapped. But he'd shown her Maria's photograph and talked about his failing heart and sat in the dark garden and been honest about his regrets. And Elena was starting to realize that hating him was going to be much harder than she'd thought. She got ready for bed, turned off the lights, and lay there staring at the ceiling. Sleep felt impossible. Her mind was too loud, too crowded with questions she didn't want to ask, and answers she didn't want to hear. At midnight, there was a soft knock. Elena's heart jumped. She considered not answering, but curiosity won, the way it always did. She opened the door. Damien stood there in pajama pants and a t-shirt, looking older and more vulnerable than she'd seen him. "Can't sleep," he said simply. "Me neither." "I thought—" He stopped, started again. "Maria used to make tea when neither of us could sleep. Chamomile with honey. She'd sit with me until the thoughts got quieter. I was wondering if you might—" He shook his head. "Never mind. This is inappropriate. I'm sorry." He turned to leave. "Wait," Elena heard herself say. "I could use some tea." They ended up in the kitchen. Rosa had gone home hours ago, and the house was quiet in the way only large, empty houses can be. Damien made tea while Elena sat at the prep island, watching him move around the space like he actually knew where things were. "You cook?" she asked. "I survive. There's a difference." He brought over 2 mugs. "Maria tried to teach me. I was a terrible student." They drank tea, talked about nothing: books, weather, the logistics of running a house this size. Safe topics, neutral ground. At some point, Elena realized she was relaxed. Not happy, not comfortable, but not braced for attack either. "This is strange," she said. "What is?" "This. Sitting in your kitchen at 1 in the morning, drinking tea like we're normal people." "We are normal people. Just people in an abnormal situation. You run a criminal empire. And you have an economics degree. We all have our flaws." Elena laughed before she could stop herself. It startled them both. Damien smiled. "That's the first time I've heard you laugh." "Don't get used to it." "I won't, but I'll remember it." They finished their tea. Elena stood to leave, and Damien stood too. "This doesn't change anything," she said. "I'm still angry. I still don't want to be here." "I know. But—" She struggled to find the words. "Thank you. For the tea. For not being terrible. The bar is low, but I'll take it." Elena went back to her room. This time, sleep came easier. And when she dreamed, it wasn't of monsters or cages. It was of sitting in a warm kitchen with a sad man who made terrible tea and told the truth even when it hurt him. She woke up confused about what that meant, and absolutely certain she didn't want to know. The next 3 weeks fell into a rhythm that Elena hadn't expected and didn't entirely trust. Breakfast appeared on her nightstand every morning like clockwork. She'd find Damien in the library most afternoons, working through papers or taking phone calls in Italian, so rapid she could only catch half the words. They had dinner together 4 nights a week, sometimes in the small dining room, sometimes in the kitchen when Rosa went home early, once in the garden when the weather held warm enough. They talked. That was the strangest part. They actually talked. Damien asked about her degree, her thesis on emerging markets, the professors she'd loved and the ones she'd wanted to strangle. Elena found herself explaining currency fluctuation and trade policy to a man who ran an empire on handshake deals and violence, and he listened like she was teaching him something valuable instead of just humoring her. She asked about the family carefully at first, then with more boldness as she realized he'd answer almost anything if she asked directly enough. He told her about his father, a brutal man who'd built the Moretti Empire with fists and fear, about his mother, who died when he was 12 and left him alone with monsters, about the first time he'd killed someone, 17 years old, a gun in his hand, protecting his younger brother from their father's rage. "Carlo?" Elena had asked, skeptical. The brother she'd seen at the wedding had mean eyes and a cruel laugh. "He wasn't always like that," Damien said quietly. "Fear changes people. Watching your father beat your brother half to death and then being the reason your brother has to kill him, that changes you even more." Elena had gone quiet after that, unsettled by the humanizing details she didn't want but couldn't unknow. During the day, she explored. The house had a gym she used most mornings, working out aggression on a treadmill and punching bag until her muscles screamed. The library became her refuge. She'd found the English translations and was working through political philosophy, which felt absurdly appropriate. The gardens were extensive enough that she could walk for an hour and not cover everything. And slowly, without meaning to, she started to notice things about Damien. The way he took his medication at exactly 8 in the morning and 8 at night, washing down pills with water, and an expression that suggested he resented needing them. The way he was careful going upstairs, always using the handrail, always moving at a measured pace. The way he sometimes pressed a hand to his chest when he thought no one was looking, like he was checking to make sure his heart was still beating. He was dying. It wasn't abstract or distant. It was real and present, and she could see it wearing him down in small increments. She still hated him, but the hate was getting complicated. On a Thursday morning, 3 weeks and 2 days after the wedding, Elena came down to breakfast and found an envelope on her plate, her name written in careful script across the front. She opened it. Inside was a credit card, black, heavy, her name embossed on it, and a note in the same handwriting. "This is yours, no limit. Buy what you want. Do what you want. Consider it a signing bonus for tolerating my company. D." Elena stared at it for a long time. Then she picked up the house phone and dialed what she'd learned was Damien's office extension. He answered on the second ring. "Elena? What is this?" "A credit card. Most people recognize them." "Don't be cute. Why?" "Because you're a person with your own life and your own needs, and it seems unreasonable to expect you to ask permission every time you want to buy coffee." His voice was calm, matter-of-fact. "Use it. Don't use it. Throw it in the ocean if it makes you feel better, but it's there if you want it." Elena hung up. She sat staring at the card for another 5 minutes, turning it over in her hands. This was a test, obviously. He wanted to see what she'd do. Whether she'd run. Whether she'd max it out and prove she was just another person who wanted his money. Or maybe, and this was the thought that scared her, maybe he just meant what he said. She put the card in her wallet. That afternoon, Elena took one of the cars from the garage, a sleek Mercedes that the driver, a quiet man named Luca, had ready before she even asked, and went into the city. Naples spread out below the estate in a chaos of narrow streets and ancient buildings, noise and life and normalcy that she'd been cut off from for weeks. She walked, found a cafe and bought an overpriced espresso just because she could, went into shops and touched things she had no intention of buying, called her best friend from university, a woman named Chiara who'd been texting increasingly frantic messages that Elena had been ignoring. "You're alive," Chiara said when she answered. "I was starting to plan your funeral. I got married. I heard, the whole city heard. Elena, what the actual fuck?" They met at a wine bar near the university. Chiara was small, fierce, with short dark hair, and an expression that suggested she was already planning someone's murder. She took one look at Elena and ordered 2 very large glasses of wine. "Talk," she demanded. Elena talked. Not about everything. She couldn't explain the late-night tea or the library conversations or the way Damien looked at Maria's photograph like his heart was breaking. But she talked about the debt, the wedding, the reality of being married to a man she'd never chosen. Chiara listened, getting progressively more furious. "Your father sold you, like property, like this is the 19th century. "I know. And you just, what, accepted it? What was I supposed to do? Run? He would have found me, and then my father would be dead and I'd be in worse trouble." Elena took a long drink of wine. "At least this way, I'm alive. I have a room. I have freedom, sort of. It could be worse." Elena, listen to yourself. You sound like a hostage justifying her captor. Maybe I am." Chiara reached across the table and grabbed her hand. "Come stay with me. Pack a bag, walk out, and don't look back. We'll figure it out." "I can't." "Why not?" Because Damien had been honest with her. Because he'd shown her his weaknesses instead of just his strength. Because she'd given him a year and 3 weeks wasn't a year, and some stubborn part of her wanted to keep her word even if he'd never asked for it. "It's complicated," Elena said finally. "It's not complicated. He's a criminal and you're trapped." "He's dying." Chiara blinked. "What?" "His heart is failing. He has maybe 5 years. He didn't marry me because he wanted a trophy. He married me because he was lonely and desperate and I was available." Elena pulled her hand back. "I know how that sounds. I know it doesn't make it right, but it makes it different than what you're thinking." "Does it? Or are you just telling yourself that so you can sleep at night?" Elena didn't have an answer for that. They finished their wine. Chiara made Elena promise to call every week, to meet for coffee, to not disappear into Damien's world completely. Elena promised, meaning it and doubting it in equal measure. When she got back to the estate, it was nearly 8. She found Damien in the library, reading something that made him frown. "Good afternoon?" he asked without looking up. "I saw a friend." "Good. You should see friends." He turned a page. "Luca said you went to the university district. How does it feel to be back there?" "Like visiting a life that belonged to someone else." Damien finally looked up. Something in his expression shifted. "I'm sorry." "Stop apologizing. If you were actually sorry, you'd let me go." "I can't do that." "I know. That's the problem." She left him there and went to her room, and she hated that she felt guilty for snapping at him, hated that she'd started to see him as a person instead of just an obstacle, hated that the walls she'd built were developing cracks she didn't know how to repair. That night, she didn't go down to dinner. Rosa brought her a tray, pasta, salad, bread, and Elena ate alone, staring at the walls. Around 10, there was a soft knock. Elena considered ignoring it, but her room was starting to feel like a cage, and anything was better than sitting in silence with her own thoughts. She opened the door. Damien stood there holding 2 mugs of tea. "Peace offering," he said. "You seemed upset earlier." "I'm upset most of the time. That's what happens when your life gets stolen." "Yes, I imagine it is." He didn't move to come in, just stood there, patient and infuriating. "I won't bother you if you want to be alone. But if you want company, the library's empty. I could use someone to tell me I'm an idiot about international trade policy." "You're good at that." Elena wanted to say no, wanted to close the door and prove she didn't need him or his tea or his library, but the walls were too close and the silence was too loud, and maybe Chiara was right. Maybe she was justifying her captor, but at least it was a more interesting cage with conversation in it. "Fine," she said, "but I'm keeping both mugs. You make terrible tea." His smile was small and genuine. "Deal." They ended up in the library until past midnight, arguing about economic theory and trade agreements, and somewhere in the debate, Elena forgot to be angry. She forgot to be careful. She just talked to someone who listened like her thoughts mattered, and when she finally went to bed, she was smiling without meaning to. The next morning, everything fell apart. Elena woke to shouting. Actual shouting, which was unusual enough in the normally quiet house to send her heart racing. She threw on clothes and ran downstairs, following the noise to Damien's office. The door was open. Inside, Damien stood behind his desk, facing 3 men Elena didn't recognize. They were younger, 40s maybe, dressed in expensive suits that couldn't quite hide the violence underneath. One of them was shouting in Italian too rapid for Elena to follow. "My father's debt, Moretti, and you know it." "Your father's debt died with your father," Damien said, his voice cold and level. "We settled that account 8 years ago." "Settled? You took everything. The business, the properties, his dignity?" "I took what was owed. If your father had issues with the terms, he should have thought of that before he tried to steal from me." The man took a step forward. His companions moved with him, and Elena saw the exact moment things were about to turn violent. Saw it in the way Damien's shoulders tensed, the way his hand moved slightly toward the desk drawer she'd bet money had a gun in it. "Who are you?" she said loudly. Everyone turned. The 3 men stared at her like she'd materialized out of smoke. Damien's expression went carefully blank. "Elena," he said quietly, "go back upstairs." "Who are they?" she repeated, not moving. One of the men, the one who'd been shouting, looked her up and down with an expression that made her skin crawl. "You're the new wife, the De Luca girl." "Signora Moretti," she corrected, putting ice in her voice. "And you're in my house shouting at my husband. I'd like to know why." Damien made a small sound that might have been surprise or approval. "Elena, they're the Rossis," one of the other men said. He was older, graying at the temples, with eyes that reminded Elena of snakes. "Carlo Rossi, Aldo Rossi, Marco Rossi, and we have business with your husband that doesn't concern you. Everything that concerns him concerns me. That's how marriage works." Carlo, the shouter, laughed. It wasn't a nice sound. "Is that right? And what does a little girl know about our business?" "I know you're in his house making threats. I know you're outnumbered." Elena crossed her arms. "There are 6 men outside that door who work for my husband. How many do you have? Dead silence. Damien was staring at her now with an expression she couldn't read, but he didn't contradict her, and that was all the confirmation the Rossis needed. Carlo's face went red. This isn't over, Moretti. It was over 8 years ago. Leave, don't come back. The three men left, radiating fury. Elena waited until she heard the front door slam, then turned to Damien. Who were they really? Exactly who they said. The Rossi family. Damien came around the desk. That was either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. Are they dangerous? Everyone is dangerous if you give them a reason. He studied her face. Thank you. For the backup. You didn't have to do that. You're my husband. Apparently that means something today. She said it like she was still figuring out whether it was true. Damien's expression softened. It means more than you know. The rest of the day passed in tense quiet. Elena noticed additional security. Men she didn't recognize stationed around the property. More cars in the driveway. Damien spent most of the afternoon on the phone, speaking Italian too low for her to hear. At dinner, which they ate in careful silence, Elena finally asked, Should I be worried? About the Rossis? No, they're loud, but not particularly effective. That's not what I asked. Damien set down his fork. There's always something to worry about in my line of work, but I've survived 40 years of people wanting me dead. I'll survive this too. You can't know that. No, but I can control what I can control and not waste energy on what I can't. He looked at her directly. If something happens to me, if things go wrong, there's a safe in my office. Combination is Maria's birthday. 11/16/73. Inside are papers, accounts, instructions. Everything you'd need. Elena's stomach dropped. Why are you telling me this? Because you should know, just in case. Damien, I'm not planning on dying, Elena, but I'm not stupid enough to assume I won't. He reached across the table and, very carefully, covered her hand with his. It was the first time he'd touched her since the wedding. His hand was warm. You've been here almost a month. You haven't run. You haven't stopped fighting, but you haven't run. That means something. It means I keep my promises, even when they're forced. Or it means you're starting to see that this could be more than a prison. He pulled his hand back. Either way. The safe. 11/16/73. Remember it. Elena went to bed uneasy, Damien's words circling in her head. She couldn't sleep. Around midnight, she got up and went to the kitchen for water. She found Rosa there, sitting at the prep island with a cup of tea and a frown. Can't sleep either? Rosa asked. Not tonight. Elena poured water from the tap. The Rossis. Are they really not dangerous? Rosa's frown deepened. Signor Moretti told you not to worry. That's not an answer. No, it's not. Rosa sighed. The Rossis used to be powerful. 20 years ago, they controlled half the docks. But Salvatore Rossi, the father, made bad choices. Tried to skim off Moretti's shipments. Signor Moretti doesn't forgive theft. What happened? What always happens? Salvatore disappeared. His business went to Signor Moretti. His sons grew up with nothing, blaming the wrong person for their father's mistakes. Rosa looked at Elena directly. They're dangerous because they're desperate. And desperate people do stupid things. Should I be scared? You should be careful. There's a difference. Elena went back to her room more unsettled than before. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to calculate odds she didn't have enough information to calculate. Trying to decide if the flutter of worry in her chest was about Damien's safety or just about her own uncertain future if something happened to him. She was still awake at 3 when she heard the sound. Glass breaking, downstairs. Then shouting, men's voices, multiple, overlapping. Elena's heart kicked into her throat. She grabbed her phone and dialed Damien's extension, but it just rang. No answer. She ran to her door, unlocked it, and nearly collided with Damien in the hallway. He was fully dressed, gun in hand, his face hard in a way she'd never seen. Get back in your room, he said. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me or Rosa. What's happening? The Rossis are stupider than I thought. Do what I said. Now. More shouting from downstairs. A gunshot, loud, unmistakable, and Elena's whole body went cold. Damien looked at her, and for just a second his expression softened. It's going to be fine. I've handled worse. Just stay here." He was gone before she could respond, moving down the hallway with the gun held low and ready. Elena stood frozen. She should go back in her room, lock the door, hide like he'd told her to. Instead, she followed him. She kept to the walls, staying in shadows, moving as quietly as she could. The stairs were empty. Below, she could hear crashing, shouting, more gunshots. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to clench them into fists. She reached the first floor. The front entrance was destroyed, door hanging off hinges, glass everywhere. 4 men in dark clothes were facing off against Damien's security. 2 were already down, not moving. The other 2 had guns out, and Damien stood in the middle of it, impossibly calm, his gun pointed at Carlo Rossi's head. "Walk away," Damien said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "Take your brother, leave. I'll pretend this didn't happen. You took everything from my father." Carlo's voice shook. "Everything. You don't get to pretend anymore. Your father was a thief and a liar. I took what he owed. If you want to blame someone for your miserable life, blame him, not me. Go to hell." Carlo raised his gun. Elena didn't think. She just moved, running down the last few stairs, shouting, "Stop!" Everyone turned. Damien's face went white. "Elena, get back!" Carlo swung his gun toward her. The next 5 seconds happened in fragments. Damien moving faster than a sick man should be able to move. A gunshot. Carlo's gun, too loud, deafening. Damien crashing into Elena, knocking her to the floor, his body covering hers. More gunshots from everywhere at once. Then silence. Elena couldn't breathe. Damien was heavy on top of her, completely still. She could feel wetness spreading across her side. Blood. Had to be blood. Someone was bleeding. "Damien," she gasped. "Damien, get up!" He didn't move. She shoved at him, panic making her strong. He rolled off her with a groan. Alive. He was alive. And Elena saw the blood. So much blood, spreading across his shoulder, soaking through his shirt. "You're shot," she said stupidly. "Yes, that happens when you get between someone and a gun." His voice was tight with pain. "Are you hit?" "No, I don't think so. We need... Security was swarming now. Someone was calling for doctors. The Rossis were on the ground. All of them. Carlo with a hole in his chest that said he wouldn't be a problem anymore. Elena couldn't look at them. Could only look at Damien, at the blood, at the way his face was going gray. "Stay with me," she said, pressing her hands against the wound even though she had no idea what she was doing. "Don't you dare die. You promised me a year. We're not even through 1 month. Might have to renegotiate terms." His eyes were already starting to unfocus. "Damien, stay awake. Trying, not very good at following orders." Paramedics arrived. Elena had no idea how they'd gotten there so fast. They pulled her away from Damien, started working on him with efficient hands and equipment she didn't understand. Someone wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Someone else asked if she was hurt. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice sounded wrong, distant. "I'm fine. Just make sure he's okay." They loaded Damien onto a stretcher. He was unconscious now, face gray, blood everywhere. Elena tried to follow, but someone stopped her. A security guard, one of the younger ones, his face pale. "Signora, you should wait here. Let the doctors... I'm going with him." She said it with all the authority she'd learned in the past month of being Signora Moretti. "Get me a car, now." The ride to the hospital was a blur. Elena sat in the back of a Mercedes that smelled like leather and blood, her hands still red, her mind refusing to process what had just happened. Damien had covered her, had taken a bullet meant for her. He'd nearly died protecting her, and she'd been in danger because of him in the first place. But somehow that fact felt less important than the other fact, that he'd protected her without hesitation, without calculation, without even thinking about it. At the hospital, they wouldn't let her into surgery. She sat in a private waiting room because, of course, the Morettis had a private waiting room, while doctors did things she couldn't see. Rosa appeared at some point, her face drawn, and sat beside Elena without speaking. Hours passed. Dawn came. A doctor finally emerged, still in scrubs, looking exhausted. "He's stable," the doctor said. "The bullet went through his shoulder. Clean exit. He lost a lot of blood, but we've transfused him." His heart held up better than I expected, considering he stopped. "He's strong." Lucky. He'll recover. Elena felt something in her chest unclench. Can I see him? He's sedated, but yes, briefly. They led her to a private room where Damien lay hooked to machines, his shoulder bandaged, his face slack in sleep. He looked old, breakable, human in a way that made Elena's throat tight. She sat in the chair beside his bed, took his hand, the first time she'd voluntarily touched him, and held it while machines beeped steadily, monitoring a heartbeat that kept going against all odds. You're an idiot, she whispered. You could have died. Your heart could have given out. And for what? For me? I'm not worth that. Damien didn't answer, just kept breathing, steady and alive. Elena sat there as the sun came up, holding the hand of a man she'd hated a month ago and couldn't quite hate anymore, and tried to figure out when everything had changed. Damien woke up fighting the sedation, which the nurses said was typical for him. Elena watched from her chair as he struggled to focus, his hand reaching automatically for the shoulder that was now bandaged and immobilized. Don't, she said, standing to stop him. You'll tear the stitches. He blinked at her. Recognition came slowly, swimming up through whatever drugs they'd pumped into him. Elena, that's my name. You're here. Where else would I be? He tried to sit up, failed, grimaced and lay back against the pillows. How long? 14 hours. You've been out since surgery. Elena sat back down, suddenly exhausted. She hadn't slept, hadn't left except to use the bathroom. Rosa had brought her coffee and a change of clothes at some point, but Elena barely remembered putting them on. The doctors say you're lucky. Clean shot. No permanent damage. Lucky, Damien repeated. His voice was rough, scraped raw. I got shot protecting my wife from a dead man's idiot son. That's not luck. That's consequence. You could have let me get shot. No, I couldn't. The simplicity of it hit her harder than it should have. No hesitation, no calculation, just flat refusal, like the alternative had never even occurred to him. Carlo's dead, Elena said. She'd gotten the details from Rosa. The others are arrested. Your brother Carlo is handling cleanup, whatever that means. Damien closed his eyes. It means making sure the police report says what we need it to say. It means paying off whoever needs to be paid off. It means turning this into a tragic home invasion instead of what it actually was. Which is? A war that ended before it started. He opened his eyes again, looking at her with an intensity that made her want to look away. You shouldn't have come downstairs. I told you to stay in your room. You're welcome, by the way. For what? For probably saving your life. Carlo was going to shoot you. I distracted him. You gave him a better target. And you took the bullet anyway. Elena leaned forward, elbows on her knees. So we're even. You're an idiot and I'm an idiot and we both almost died. Can we move past it? Damien studied her face. You have blood on your collar. Elena looked down. He was right. There were rust-colored stains on the shirt Rosa had brought her. His blood, probably, from when she'd tried to stop the bleeding. She'd stopped seeing it hours ago. Doesn't matter, she said. It matters to me. A nurse came in before Elena could respond. All efficiency and medical jargon, checking vitals and adjusting equipment. She gave Damien more pain medication despite his protests, told Elena he needed rest, and left with a stern look that suggested she expected to be obeyed. Go home, Damien said once they were alone again. Sleep. You look terrible. You got shot and you're telling me I look terrible. That's rich. Elena, I'm not leaving. She said it firmly, surprised by her own certainty. Not until they release you, so stop arguing and go back to sleep. He looked like he wanted to fight about it, but the medication was already pulling him under, and after a moment his eyes drifted closed. His breathing evened out. Elena watched him sleep and tried to sort through the tangle in her chest that she refused to call concern. The next 2 days passed in a strange limbo. Damien's doctors wanted him kept for observation because of his heart, so Elena essentially moved into his hospital room. She slept in the chair when she slept at all. Rosa brought food she mostly didn't eat. Various members of the Moretti organization came and went, reporting to Damien in low voices about things Elena didn't try to overhear. His brother Carlo came on the second day. He looked at Elena like she was an interesting insect, then ignored her completely. The Rossis are finished, Carlo told Damien. Aldo took a deal, 10 years if he testifies against his own suppliers. Marco ran. We'll find him. Let him run, Damien said. He was sitting up now, color returning to his face, but he still moved carefully. The family's broken. He's not a threat. He shot you. His brother shot me. And his brother is dead. It's done. Carlo's jaw tightened. You're getting soft. Maria made you soft, and now this girl is making you softer. Eventually someone's going to notice you're weak. Elena had been pretending to read a magazine. She set it down. Get out. Carlo turned to her slowly. Excuse me? I said, get out. Your brother just took a bullet and you're in here questioning his decisions. He doesn't need your commentary. He needs rest. This is family business. And I'm family. You said so yourself at the wedding. So when I tell you to leave, you leave. The room went very quiet. Carlo looked at Damien, clearly expecting him to intervene, but Damien just watched Elena with something that might have been amusement. You heard my wife, Damien said finally. We'll finish this conversation another time. Carlo left radiating fury. The door closed behind him, and Elena waited for Damien to tell her she'd overstepped. Instead, he said, that was unwise. Probably. Carlo doesn't forgive slights. Neither do I. And he's wrong. You're not weak. You're just not cruel for the sake of cruelty. Elena picked up her magazine again. There's a difference. Is there? I think so. I'm still figuring it out. They released Damien on the third day with a list of restrictions longer than Elena's thesis. No heavy lifting, no stress. Medication 3 times daily, follow-up in a week. The doctor delivering this news looked dubious about Damien's ability to follow any of it. I'll make sure he behaves, Elena said. The doctor looked even more dubious about that. The ride home was quiet. Damien sat in the back seat of the Mercedes, his arm in a sling, staring out the window at Naples passing by. Elena watched him watch the city and wondered what he was thinking. Back at the estate, Rosa had prepared his room, the one down the hall from Elena's that she'd never actually seen inside. Damien headed straight there, moving slower than usual, and Elena followed before she could question why. His room was larger than hers, but somehow less formal. Dark wood furniture, books everywhere. A photograph on the nightstand of Maria, smiling at the camera like she had a secret. The bed was made with military precision. Damien sat on the edge of it carefully, wincing. You don't have to hover. I'm not hovering. I'm making sure you don't do something stupid. I just got shot. That ship has sailed. Elena crossed her arms. The doctor said no stress. That includes running your criminal empire from bed. I don't run an empire. I manage a family business. You say potato. I say organized crime. He smiled despite himself. Then the smile faded and he looked at her with something raw in his expression. Thank you for staying at the hospital. You didn't have to. You took a bullet for me. It seemed like the least I could do. I'd do it again. I know, that's what scares me. The honesty surprised them both. Elena looked away first, suddenly uncomfortable with how much she'd revealed. I should let you rest, she said. Elena? Damien's voice stopped her at the door. That night, when you came downstairs, why did you follow me? I told you to stay in your room. She turned back. He was watching her with those dark eyes that missed nothing, and she knew whatever she said next mattered. Because I was scared, she admitted. Not for me, for you. And that didn't make any sense because a month ago I hated you. But somewhere between the tea and the library and you being honest about things you didn't have to be honest about, I stopped being able to think of you as just the man who bought me. And when I heard the gunshots, all I could think was that you were down there and something might happen to you, and I'd never get to figure out what that meant. Damien was very still. What does it mean? I don't know yet, but I think I want to find out. She left before he could respond, her heart pounding like she'd just jumped off a cliff, and wasn't sure if there was water below. The next week was strange. Damien followed doctor's orders for once in his life, which meant he stayed in his room or the library, worked reduced hours, actually took his medication without arguing. Elena found herself checking on him multiple times a day, bringing him tea, making sure he ate, sitting in his room and reading while he worked through papers because she'd discovered he was terrible at resting alone. They talked about everything and nothing. His childhood, which had been violent and lonely, her mother, who died of cancer when Elena was 16 and left her alone with her useless father, books they'd both read, places they wanted to travel, the theoretical mechanics of laundering a criminal fortune into something legitimate. "It's possible," Elena said one afternoon. She was sitting in the chair by his window while he lay on the bed, arms still in a sling but healing well. "You'd need front companies, legitimate investments, a good accountant who knows how to make everything look clean." "Would you do it?" Damien asked. "If I gave you access to everything, accounts, contacts, the full scope of operations, could you build something legitimate?" Elena thought about it. "Maybe. It would take years, and I'd need to actually understand what I was working with. I could show you, after I'm healed, if you wanted to learn." "Why would you trust me with that?" "Because you're the only person in my life who has no reason to lie to me. Everyone else wants something: power, money, protection. You just want your life back. That makes you the most trustworthy person I know." It was a depressing statement, and probably true. Elena looked at him lying there, looking older and more tired than a man in his 60s should, dying by inches from a heart that had given up on him. "What was she like?" Elena asked. "Maria. Really like. Not the edited version." Damien's expression softened the way it always did when he talked about his dead wife. Stubborn, funny. She had a terrible temper when she was angry, but she never stayed angry long. She burned everything she cooked, but she kept trying anyway because she liked the ritual of it. She stole my shirts to sleep in. She talked to plants like they could hear her. He paused. "She was the best person I ever knew, and I never deserved her. And I spent every day we had together trying to earn her anyway." "Did you? Earn her?" "I don't know. She stayed until she died. Maybe that's the same thing." Elena was quiet for a moment. "I'm not her." "I know. I don't want to be compared to her, or measured against her. If this, whatever this is between us, if it's going to be anything, it has to be its own thing, not me trying to fill a dead woman's shoes." "I wouldn't want you to." Damien sat up carefully, moving to the edge of the bed. "Maria was Maria. You're you. They're not interchangeable. And what I felt for her has nothing to do with what I'm starting to feel for you." Elena's breath caught. "What are you starting to feel?" "Hope, mostly. That maybe the last years of my life won't be as empty as I thought. That maybe I did one thing right when I did everything else wrong." He looked at her directly. "What are you feeling?" "Confused. Angry at myself for not being angrier. Scared that I'm falling for my captor, and that makes me pathetic." She stood, suddenly needing to move. "I went to see my father yesterday." Damien's eyebrows rose. "How did that go?" "I told him his debt was paid, that he doesn't get to contact me anymore, that as far as I'm concerned, I don't have a father." Her voice was flat. He cried. Again. He's very good at crying, less good at being an actual parent. "I'm sorry." "Are you?" "He's the reason I'm here. If he hadn't borrowed money from you, if he hadn't offered me as payment, none of this would have happened." "No," Damien agreed. "You'd be working in Milan right now, dating someone appropriate, living the life you planned, and I'd be dying alone in this house, exactly as I deserved." "You don't deserve to die alone." "Don't I? I've killed people, Elena, a lot of people. Some of them probably even deserved it. But most were just in the way or knew too much or looked at me wrong on the wrong day. That's not the kind of man who deserves comfort at the end." Elena came to stand in front of him. "Stop." "Stop what?" "Stop acting like you're beyond redemption. You're not. You're just a man who made bad choices for a long time and wants to make better ones now. That doesn't erase the past, but it counts for something. Does it count enough for you to forgive me? For the wedding, the arrangement, all of it?" "I don't know yet," Elena said honestly. "Ask me again in a year." The follow-up appointment came on schedule. The doctor was pleased with Damien's progress, surprised his heart had held up through the trauma, cautiously optimistic about his recovery. He cleared Damien for light activity and told him to keep taking it easy. On the drive home, Damien was quiet. Elena had learned his silences by now, could tell the difference between thoughtful quiet and troubled quiet. This was troubled. "What's wrong?" she asked. "I've been thinking about what you said about making better choices. And? And I think I need to show you something. The full scope of what you married into, not the edited version." He looked at her. "It's not pretty. A lot of it you're going to hate. But if we're going to move forward, if you're going to help me build something legitimate, you need to understand what you're working with." "Okay," Elena said. "Show me." That night, Damien took her to his office. The real one, not the study where he took phone calls. It was in the basement, behind a door that required a code and a thumbprint, and it looked like something out of a spy movie. Computers, filing cabinets, a wall of monitors showing various locations Elena didn't recognize. He spent 4 hours walking her through the family business. The legitimate fronts, construction companies, restaurants, import-export operations. The less legitimate operations, protection rackets, gambling, loan sharking. The money flows, the power structures, the web of connections that kept everything running. Elena listened and took notes and tried not to show how overwhelmed she was. "The dock operations are the core," Damien explained, pointing to a map. "Everything else feeds from that. We control 70% of cargo moving through Naples. Some of it's legal, most isn't." "Drugs?" Elena asked. "Some. Not as much as you'd think. Mostly stolen goods, counterfeit products, occasionally weapons, though I've been moving away from that." "Why?" "Because I'm old and tired, and weapons trafficking attracts too much attention from people with bigger guns than mine." He pulled up a spreadsheet. "This is the accounting, the real numbers, not what we report. Last year we grossed 80 million euros. About 40% was legitimate income." Elena stared at the numbers. "And you want to flip that? Make it all legitimate?" "Over time, yes. Maybe not all of it. Some operations are too entrenched to unwind without starting wars." "But the majority?" He looked at her. "Could you do it?" "I'd need access to everything. Bank accounts, shell companies, all the books. I'd need to understand every revenue stream and every risk." She was already thinking through the logistics, her brain shifting into the analytical mode that had gotten her through university. It would take years, 5, maybe more, and there would be resistance from people who profit from the current system. "Like my brother." "Especially your brother." Elena set down her pen. "He already hates me. This would make it worse." "Carlo hates everyone. It's his defining characteristic, but he won't move against you while I'm alive." "And after?" Damien was quiet for a moment. "After I'm gone, everything is yours. The money, the property, the legitimate businesses. The family business goes to Carlo because I can't stop that without civil war. But you'll have enough resources to build whatever you want, completely independent of him. That's assuming I'm still here when you die." "Yes, it is." Elena looked around the office, at the monitors and files and evidence of 40 years building an empire on blood and fear. Then she looked at Damien, standing there with his arm still in a sling, offering her the keys to everything. "I have conditions," she said. "Name them." "I want full transparency. No more secrets. If I'm going to do this, I need to know everything." "Done." "I want autonomy. You can advise, but I make the final decisions about the restructuring." "Agreed. And I want you to promise me something." Elena stepped closer. "Promise me you'll take care of yourself. Take your medication, see your doctors. Actually try to live as long as possible instead of just running out the clock." "Elena, promise me. Because if I'm going to invest years of my life in this, I want you there to see it. I want you to see that the last thing you built wasn't an empire. It was something good." Damien looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out with his good arm and cupped her face, his hand warm against her cheek. It was the most intimate thing he'd ever done, and Elena's breath caught. "I promise," he said quietly. "I'll try." She believed him. They spent the next week immersed in files and spreadsheets. Elena took over the desk in Damien's office, her laptop surrounded by papers, her mind deep in the architecture of crime and money. Damien sat nearby, answering questions, explaining connections, occasionally arguing with her about methodology. It felt like partnership. Real partnership, not the forced arrangement from a month ago. They worked well together. Damien's institutional knowledge combined with Elena's analytical skills created something neither could have done alone. Rosa brought them food. They ate at the desk, barely noticing what they were consuming. At night, they'd move to the library and argue about theory, whether full legitimacy was possible or if some amount of criminal activity was inevitable in their world. "You're an idealist," Damien said one night. "You're a pessimist. I'm a realist." "Same thing from where I'm sitting." He smiled. "Maria used to say the same thing. She thought I could change, retire, walk away from all of it. Could you have?" "No, not while I was healthy. The family would have eaten itself alive without someone holding it together." He looked at her. "But I'm not healthy anymore, and maybe that's the permission I needed to try something different." Elena reached across and took his hand. It felt natural now, the touching. Easy. "We'll figure it out." "We," Damien repeated. "I like that word. Don't get used to it. I'm still mad at you most of the time." "I know. I'm counting on it to keep me honest." They worked late into the night. At some point, Elena fell asleep at the desk, her head on her folded arms. She woke to find a blanket over her shoulders and Damien gone. The clock said it was 3 in the morning. She found him in the garden, sitting on Maria's bench, looking up at the stars. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Heart medication makes me restless sometimes." He patted the bench beside him. "Join me?" Elena sat. The night was cold, clear, beautiful. "What are you thinking about?" "How strange life is. A month ago, you hated me. Now you're falling asleep at my desk, helping me rebuild everything I've destroyed. If someone had told me that was possible, I wouldn't have believed them. I still hate you sometimes." "I know. That's how I know this is real." Elena leaned her head on his shoulder, carefully, mindful of his injury. He tensed for just a second, then relaxed. They sat like that for a while, watching stars and breathing the same cold air. "Thank you," Elena said quietly. "For what?" "For being honest. For giving me space to figure this out. For not being the monster I wanted you to be." "That's a low bar." "It's my bar. And you cleared it." Damien turned his head slightly, and his lips brushed her hair. Not quite a kiss, just a touch. "What are we doing, Elena?" "I don't know, but I think I want to keep doing it." "Even though I'm dying?" "Especially because you're dying. Everyone's dying. You just happen to know your timeline. That doesn't make this less real. It just makes it more urgent." He pulled back to look at her. "I'm falling in love with you. I need you to know that. I'm trying not to because it seems cruel to both of us, but it's happening anyway." Elena's heart kicked. She should be scared. Should put distance between them. Should protect herself from the inevitable grief coming down the line. Instead, she said, "Good, because I'm falling too, and it would be pathetic if I was doing it alone." Damien laughed. Actually laughed, deep and genuine and surprised. "We're both idiots." "Probably, but at least we're idiots together." He kissed her then, soft and careful and asking permission with every second. Elena kissed him back, answering the question, making a choice that was completely her own for the first time since the wedding. When they pulled apart, Damien's eyes were bright. "This is a terrible idea." "The worst," Elena agreed. "You're going to regret this." "Maybe, but I'm doing it anyway." They went inside together, hands linked, and Elena felt something settle in her chest that might have been peace, or might have been resignation, or might have been the beginning of love that she didn't want but was choosing anyway. And for the first time since she'd walked down an aisle in a dress she didn't choose, Elena felt like she was exactly where she wanted to be. The morning after their kiss, Elena woke up in her own bed feeling like she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying the garden, the conversation, the way Damien had looked at her like she was something precious instead of something purchased. Her phone buzzed. A text from Chiara. "Coffee today? You've been radio silent for 2 weeks, and I'm starting to worry." Elena texted back, "Can you come here instead? I need to talk and I can't do it in public." Chiara arrived an hour later, taking in the estate with wide eyes. Rosa showed her to the library where Elena was waiting, and the moment the door closed, Chiara said, "Holy hell, you live here?" "Technically." "This place is insane. How many rooms does it have?" "I stopped counting at 20. Elena poured tea from the service Rosa had brought. "That's not what I wanted to talk about." Chiara sat down, her expression shifting to concern. "What happened? You look different." I kissed him. "What?" "Damien. Last night in the garden, I kissed him. He kissed me. We kissed each other. Elena set down the teapot before she dropped it. I think I'm falling in love with him, and I don't know what to do about it. Chiara stared at her. The man who bought you. You're falling in love with the man who paid 3 million euros to marry you against your will. I know how it sounds. It sounds like Stockholm Syndrome. That's what I thought too. But it's been almost 6 weeks, and he's never been anything but honest with me. He gave me my own room, my own life. He's teaching me his business so I can legitimize it. He took a bullet for me, Chiara. He nearly died protecting me. That doesn't make the original arrangement okay. No, it doesn't. Elena wrapped her hands around her teacup. But I can't keep judging him for something he can't change. He can't undo the wedding. He can't undo my father's debt. All he can do is try to make the situation bearable. And he's doing that. More than that. He's giving me a future. What kind of future? He's dying. You said so yourself. 5 years, maybe. And yes, that's going to hurt. But 5 years with someone who sees me as a person is better than 50 years with someone who sees me as property. Elena met her friend's eyes. I know you think I'm making a mistake. Maybe I am, but it's my mistake to make. Chiara was quiet for a long time. Then she reached across and took Elena's hand. Are you safe? Really safe? Because if you're telling me you love him just because you're scared of what happens if you don't, I'm safe, I promise. Elena squeezed back. He's not perfect. He's controlling sometimes, and he has a whole history I'm still trying to understand. But he's not cruel. And I think maybe we're saving each other. From what? From being alone in terrible situations. Chiara stayed for lunch. She asked hard questions that Elena answered as honestly as she could. By the time she left, she still looked worried, but she hugged Elena tight and said, "Call me if you need anything at all. I don't care what time it is." Elena promised she would. That afternoon, she found Damien in his office, on the phone speaking rapid Italian. He gestured for her to wait, finished the conversation, and hung up with a grimace. Problem? Elena asked. The usual. Someone thinks they can skim without consequences. They'll learn otherwise. He set down the phone. How's Chiara? Concerned I've lost my mind. Have you? Probably. Elena came around the desk. But I'm okay with it. Damien pulled her down to sit on his knee, his good side, away from the healing shoulder. It should have felt wrong or forced, but it didn't. It felt natural, like they'd been doing this for years instead of hours. I need to tell you something, he said. Elena's stomach tightened. That sounds ominous. It's not bad, just important. He took a breath. I spoke to my lawyers this morning. I'm changing my will. When I die, everything goes to you, not just the legitimate holdings. Everything. Damien, let me finish. Carla will fight it. The family will fight it. But the will is ironclad, and I'm setting up trusts that make it almost impossible to contest. You'll have security, resources, and most importantly, you'll have choice. Stay in Naples, leave Naples, burn it all down and start over. Whatever you want. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. Because someday, hopefully a long time from now, but someday, I won't be here. And I need to know you'll be okay. That you'll have the freedom I couldn't give you at the beginning. I don't want your money. I want you. You can have both. He cupped her face, thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. I'm trying to give you the best life I can, even if I'm only in part of it. They kissed, and this time it was different, deeper, more certain. Elena felt herself letting go of the last bits of resistance, the final walls she'd built to protect herself from exactly this feeling. The next few months unfolded in ways Elena never could have predicted. She dove into the business, working 16-hour days analyzing operations and building plans for legitimization. Damien was right beside her, sharing decades of knowledge, arguing with her ideas, occasionally admitting she was right about something he'd been doing wrong for years. They fought sometimes. Real fights, not the careful politeness from the first weeks. Elena yelled at him for being stubborn. He yelled at her for being reckless. They slammed doors and said things they had to apologize for later. And then they'd make up, talking through the actual issue underneath the anger, learning how to be two strong-willed people in the same space without destroying each other. Slowly, Elena moved her things from her room to his. Not all at once, just gradually. A drawer of clothes, her laptop, her favorite books. Until one morning, she woke up in his bed, his arm around her waist, and realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd slept in her own room. "When did this happen?" she asked, half asleep. "When did what happen?" Damien's voice was rough with sleep. "This. Us. When did we become an actual couple instead of just two people trapped in an arrangement?" "I think it was the library. That first night with tea. You looked at me like I might be human, and I was done for." Elena turned to face him. Morning light caught the silver in his hair, the lines around his eyes. He looked older in the early morning, but also softer, more real. "I think it was earlier," she said. "The wedding. When you didn't retaliate after I hit you. You could have destroyed me, and you just didn't. That was self-preservation. I knew if I fought back, I'd lose the only chance I had at something real. You were playing the long game." "I'm always playing the long game. You should know that by now." She kissed him, and they didn't get out of bed for another hour. At the 3-month mark, Damien asked her to marry him again. They were in the garden, the same bench where they'd first kissed, and he pulled out a small box that definitely hadn't been there a minute ago. Elena stared at it. "What are you doing?" "Asking you to marry me. Properly this time. With a choice." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, not the massive diamond from the first wedding, but something smaller, more delicate. An emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds set in gold. "Maria's ring was too big for her," Damien said quietly. "She said it felt like wearing a chandelier. So I had this made for our first anniversary. She wore it every day until she died." He took it out of the box. "I want you to have it. Not because I'm replacing her with you, but because she would have liked you. And because I think she'd want it to go to someone who understands that love isn't about grand gestures. It's about showing up every day, even when it's hard." Elena couldn't speak. Tears were running down her face and she couldn't make them stop. "I know we're already married," Damien continued, "but that wedding wasn't yours. It was mine. A transaction, a business deal. This is me asking you, Elena DeLuca, the woman who slapped me at the altar and then somehow decided I was worth saving. Will you marry me again? In a ceremony that's actually about us? With vows that we both mean?" "Yes," Elena whispered. "Yes, of course yes." He slid the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her. They kissed on Maria's bench, and Elena thought maybe some love stories didn't start with happily ever after. Maybe some started with forcing two broken people together and hoping they'd choose to heal in the same direction. They planned the wedding for a month later, small, private. Just Rosa, a priest who was actually a friend instead of a family retainer, and Chiara as Elena's witness. They held it in the garden at sunset, and Elena wore a simple white dress she'd chosen herself. This time, when the priest asked if she took Damien Moretti as her husband, Elena said, "I do," and meant it with her whole heart. This time when Damien said his vows, his voice cracked and his eyes were wet, and Elena saw the man underneath the legend. Just a man who was tired and scared and trying desperately to be good enough for one more person before he died. This time when they kissed, it was a promise instead of a performance. At the reception, just the 5 of them with champagne and Rosa's cooking, Chiara pulled Elena aside. "You're sure about this?" she asked. "Completely. Even knowing everything. He's not perfect. I'm not perfect, but we're perfect for each other, and that's enough." Chiara hugged her. "Then I'm happy for you. Scared, but happy." "Me too." Winter came, and with it came changes. Elena officially took over financial operations for the legitimate businesses. She restructured 3 companies, fired 2 executives who were embezzling, and tripled profits in the first quarter. Damien watched her work with something like pride, occasionally offering advice but mostly staying out of her way. His health held steady. The medication managed his symptoms. He still moved carefully, still had bad days where his chest hurt and breathing was work. But he had good days too, and on those days he was almost the man he'd been before his heart started failing. They talked about the future constantly, the foundation they'd build together, the scholarships for kids from families like Elena's, who deserved better than what they'd been given, the community center in the neighborhood where Damien had grown up, the hospital wing they'd fund in Maria's name. "We're building a legacy," Elena said one night. "You're building a legacy. I'm just funding it." "That's not true. This is both of us." "No, This is you taking my blood money and turning it into something that doesn't make me ashamed. Damien pulled her closer. That's the gift you've given me. Not love, though that's considerable, but hope. The possibility that I might leave this world slightly better than I found it. Elena kissed his chest, right over his heart. You're leaving it better because you're leaving me in it. That counts for something. Plus, spring arrived. The gardens bloomed. Elena found out she was pregnant on a Tuesday morning, staring at a test in the bathroom while her hands shook. She found Damien in the library. He took one look at her face and stood up. What's wrong? I'm pregnant. He went very still. You're sure? 3 tests, all positive. I have a doctor's appointment tomorrow to confirm, but yes, I'm sure. Damien sat down heavily. For a long moment, he just stared at nothing, and Elena's heart sank. She'd known this was the possibility, had been careful with birth control, but not perfect, and she'd thought maybe he'd be happy, but clearly, I'm going to be a father, he said quietly. Yes. At 66 years old, with a heart that barely works, I'm going to be a father. Are you... Elena's voice cracked. Are you upset? He looked up at her, and his eyes were bright with tears. I'm terrified, and I'm happier than I have any right to be. He stood and crossed to her, taking her face in both hands. Elena, you're giving me something I never thought I'd have. A child. A future that extends beyond my death. I don't have words for what that means. So, you're happy? I'm everything. Happy, scared, overwhelmed, grateful, all of it at once. They held each other in the library, and Elena felt the baby between them, tiny and impossible and already changing everything. The pregnancy was normal, which the doctor said was a minor miracle given Damien's stress levels and Elena's age. She worked through the first trimester, then scaled back in the second when standing for long periods made her dizzy. Damien hovered, driving her crazy with his concern, until she finally yelled at him that she was pregnant, not dying, and he needed to back off. He backed off. For approximately 2 days. Then he was back to hovering, and Elena gave up trying to change him. At the 6-month mark, they learned they were having a boy. Damien cried. Actually cried, tears running down his face in the ultrasound room while the technician politely pretended not to notice. A son, he said that night. They were in bed, his hand on Elena's stomach, feeling the baby kick. I'm going to have a son. We're going to have a son, plural. This is a joint effort. I won't be here to see him grow up. You don't know that. Elena, you don't. The doctor said your heart is stable. The medication is working. You could have 10 years. 15. You could walk him to his first day of school. And if I don't, then you'll be here for his birth, for his first smile, for as much as you get. And I'll make sure he knows who his father was. Not the crime boss, not the legend, just Damien. The man who read philosophy and made terrible tea and loved his wife so much he rebuilt his entire life to deserve her. Damien kissed her stomach. Thank you. For what? For giving me a reason to fight. I was ready to die, before you. I was tired and ready and just counting down days. But now, his voice broke. Now I want every minute I can steal. Every single one. Then fight for them. Take your medication. See your doctors. Rest when you need to. Fight for us. I will. I promise. The baby came early on a November morning, 6 weeks before his due date. Elena's water broke at 3 a.m, and by dawn she was in the hospital, cursing Damien's name and threatening to divorce him if he ever touched her again. You said that 3 times now, Damien said, holding her hand while she squeezed hard enough to cut off circulation. I'm keeping count. I hate you. You said that too. I mean it this time. Labor lasted 12 hours. Long, painful, terrifying hours where Elena was convinced she was dying and the doctors kept saying everything was fine. Damien stayed beside her the entire time, talking her through contractions, letting her yell at him, looking almost as scared as she felt. Finally, mercifully, their son arrived. Small, red, screaming furiously at the indignity of being born. The doctor placed him on Elena's chest, and she looked down at this tiny human they'd made and felt her entire world reorganize itself around him. He's perfect, she whispered. Damien was crying again, unashamedly, his hand on the baby's back. He's so small. That's what babies are. I forgot. It's been a long time since I held someone this small. They named him Matteo, after Damien's mother's father. Matteo de Luca Moretti, born at 3 pounds, 8 ounces, with his mother's dark hair and his father's nose. The first weeks were chaos. Matteo was small and needed extra care. Elena was exhausted and overwhelmed and learning to breastfeed while running on 2 hours of sleep. Damien was trying to help, but his health made night shifts difficult, and they fought about it. Stupid, tired fights that ended with both of them apologizing and trying again. But slowly, they found a rhythm. Rosa helped during the day. Chiara came over and held the baby so Elena could shower. Damien rocked Matteo for hours, singing Italian lullabies in a voice rough with emotion, and Elena would wake at 2 a.m. to find them both asleep in the chair by the window. At Matteo's 1-month checkup, the pediatrician declared him healthy and thriving. Elena cried from relief. That night, they celebrated with takeout pizza and champagne, eating on the floor of the nursery while Matteo slept in his crib. "We did it," Elena said. "We made a human and kept him alive for a whole month." "The bar is low, but I'll take it." Damien raised his glass. "To us, to Matteo, to the strangest family ever assembled. To love we didn't choose, but chose anyway." They clinked glasses. Time moved differently with the baby. Days blurred together in a haze of feedings and diapers and stolen moments of sleep. But within that chaos, Elena found something she'd never expected. Joy. Real, uncomplicated joy in the weight of Matteo in her arms, in Damien's terrible singing, in the garden walks where they introduced their son to roses. Matteo's first Christmas was quiet. Just the 3 of them, and Rosa, exchanging small gifts while the baby dozed in a swing. Elena gave Damien a photo album she'd made, documenting their first year together. He paged through it slowly, stopping on the photo from their second wedding. "Look at us," he said. "We look happy." "We were happy." "We are happy." "Yes, we are." He gave her a small envelope. Inside was a deed to a property in Rome near the university. 3 apartments, fully paid off, generating rental income. "It's yours," Damien said, "completely separate from everything else. If something happens to me, if you decide you want to leave Naples, you'll have a place to go. Income to support yourself. A fresh start." Elena set down the deed. "I'm not leaving. You might want to someday, and I want you to have the option." "Damien," she took his hand. "I chose you. I chose this life. I'm not going anywhere. Promise me you'll keep it anyway, for Matteo, if not for you." She promised. Spring came again, and with it came Matteo's first steps. He took 3 wobbling steps across the living room, from Elena to Damien, and they both cheered like he'd won an Olympic medal. Matteo laughed, delighted with himself, and promptly fell on his bottom. "He's going to be walking by summer," Elena said. "Running by fall. Look at him. He's fearless." "He gets that from you." "No, he gets that from you. You're the bravest person I know." They were sitting in the garden one evening, Matteo asleep in Elena's arms, when Damien said, "I need to tell you something." Elena's heart dropped. "Your heart?" "No, well, yes, but that's not—" He took a breath. "I saw my doctor last week, the checkup I've been putting off." "And?" "And the medication is working better than they expected. My heart is stable, stronger than it's been in 2 years. They're saying I might have—" His voice caught. 10 years, maybe more." Elena felt tears start. "You're going to see him grow up." "I might. There are no guarantees, but I might see him start school, might teach him to read, might—" He stopped, overcome. Elena shifted Matteo carefully and reached for Damien's hand. "You're going to be here. You're going to be the annoying dad at soccer games and the one who teaches him terrible Italian jokes. You're going to be here, Damien. I want to be, more than anything." They sat in the garden as the sun set, their son asleep between them, and Elena thought about the impossibility of their story, how it had started with hatred and force and ended with love and choice, how she'd walked down an aisle feeling like property and somehow found herself here, a mother, a wife, a partner in building something that mattered. "Do you regret it?" Damien asked. Any of it? Elena thought about the question. Thought about the wedding, the anger, the slow thaw into something real. Thought about the night he'd shown her Maria's photograph and been honest about his loneliness. Thought about late nights in the library and bad tea and learning to love someone she'd never wanted to meet. I regret that I didn't get to choose it, she said finally. I regret that it started with my father's cowardice and your power. But the rest of it? Everything we built after that first terrible day? I don't regret any of that. Even knowing how it started? Especially knowing how it started, because it means everything after was a choice. Every conversation, every kiss, every time I decided to stay instead of run, those were mine. And I chose you. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. Damien pulled her close, careful of the baby sleeping between them. I love you. I don't say it enough, but I love you. You saved my life in every way that matters. You saved mine too. You just did it slower. They stayed in the garden until the stars came out, and when they finally went inside, it was to the house that had stopped being a prison and become a home. Mateo's first birthday came in November. They threw a party, bigger than Elena had planned, smaller than Damien wanted. Family, friends, people from both their lives coming together to celebrate a baby who represented everything they'd built. Carlo came. He held his nephew awkwardly and told Damien he'd done well, which was probably the closest to approval he'd ever get from his brother. He looked at Elena with something that might have been respect and said, "You've changed him. I don't know if it's good or bad yet, but you've changed him." "Is that a compliment?" Elena asked. "It's an observation. Take it however you want." After the party, after everyone left and Mateo was asleep upstairs, Elena and Damien collapsed on the couch. "We survived," Damien said. "Barely." "Do we have to do this every year?" "Until he's 18 at least," Damien groaned. Elena laughed and kissed him, and somewhere upstairs their son slept peacefully, unaware that his parents had built a family from ashes and will and the stubborn insistence that love could grow anywhere if you gave it enough time. 5 years later, Elena stood in the garden during Mateo's 6th birthday party, watching Damien teach their son how to throw a football. Damien was grayer now, moved a little slower, but he was there, alive, present, keeping the promise he'd made years ago to fight for every minute. The foundation they'd built together funded scholarships for 50 students a year. The community center bore Maria's name and served 300 families. The legitimate businesses thrived, while the illegal operations had been reduced to almost nothing. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, but it was better, measurably better. Chiara appeared beside Elena, her own daughter in tow. "You look happy." "I am happy. I still can't believe this is your life, that it worked out." "Neither can I sometimes, but it did." "Are you glad? Really glad? Or are you just making the best of a bad situation?" Elena watched Damien lift Mateo onto his shoulders, both of them laughing. Watched her son's face light up with joy. Watched the man she'd married twice, once because she had to and once because she wanted to, being exactly the father she'd hoped he would be. "I'm glad," she said. "I'm so glad it's ridiculous. This isn't the life I planned, but it's the life I chose, and that makes all the difference." Damien caught her eye across the garden and smiled. The same smile from their second wedding, full of love and gratitude and the quiet knowledge that they'd survived something that should have destroyed them and built something beautiful instead. Elena smiled back, and in that moment she understood something fundamental about love and choice and the strange paths life takes. You don't always get to choose how your story starts, but if you're brave enough, honest enough, willing enough to see past the hurt to the human underneath, you get to choose how it continues. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get to choose an ending that looks nothing like the beginning and everything like home. Mateo called for her. "Mama, come play." And Elena went to join her family in the garden that had witnessed their evolution from strangers to something infinitely more complicated and infinitely more real. She'd walked down an aisle 6 years ago feeling like property, and she'd slapped the man waiting for her because she'd refused to pretend otherwise. That slap had been the first honest thing in an arrangement built on lies. And somehow, impossibly, that honesty had been enough. Enough to build on, enough to grow from, enough to transform forced proximity into genuine partnership, resentment into understanding, and a marriage of convenience into something that looked an awful lot like love. It wasn't a fairy tale. There was no magic, no destiny, no sense that they'd been meant for each other all along. It was just two broken people who'd been thrown together and decided, slowly, painfully, one day at a time, to heal in the same direction, to choose each other even when they didn't have to build something worth keeping from materials that should have only made a prison. And in the end, Elena thought as Damien pulled her into a hug and Matteo wrapped his small arms around both their legs, maybe that was better than a fairy tale. Because fairy tales were about magic and fate and love that conquered all without effort. But their story was about work and choice, and the revolutionary act of seeing someone clearly and deciding they were worth the risk anyway. It was messy and complicated and real. It was everything she never wanted and everything she needed. It was proof that sometimes the worst beginnings led to the best middles, and that love didn't need a perfect start. It just needed people willing to show up, be honest, and try. 6 years ago, Elena De Luca had married a monster because she had no choice. Today, Elena Moretti loved a man because she'd chosen to. And that choice, made and remade every single day, had changed everything.